Welcome everyone to a special Atos webinar on Future of Managed Security Services, how to stop threats and build resiliency with cybersecurity mesh architecture. Before we get started, if you have any questions for the Q&A session, please submit them using the questions tab under your slides window. You can also download this presentation from attachments. To download, just click on the attachments tab below the video screen and you'll have your copy. This webinar is being recorded. All attendees will receive a link to the webcast 24 to 48 hours after the presentation. We have two speakers today. Gautam Sampath, Principal Security Analyst with ISG, and Vinod Vasudevan, Global CTO for Managed Detection and Response, and Deputy Global CTO for Cybersecurity Services at Atos. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar, and I'm going to pass it over to Gautam. Gautam, over to you.
Hey, thanks very much, Srikanth. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Gautam. I'm a principal analyst with ISG, and I predominantly focus on cybersecurity services and solutions. And my main region of focus is the US. And firstly, thanks to the Atos team for providing me with this opportunity, as well as giving an interesting topic. Over the past 2 years, we've been speaking with a lot of managed security service providers, and that's what has helped us in creating this line of thought in terms of how interesting the MSSP market has actually become. While it was always the biggest within the other security segments, for some reason it has always been a little dull, and to be honest, not a dull moment over the last 2 years when we started discussing with service providers. Where I want to start off is with the trends in terms of how the cybersecurity market has evolved over the last 2 years, especially over the last 1 year. And from there, I want to try and explain, or I want to try and use the line of thought with which we want to try and position the MSSP providers and how they are going to become the paramount thread which connects the future of cybersecurity. Last year, I would definitely say that the cybersecurity market witnessed quite a lot of disruptive forces, which acted upon it and unleashed a sort of renewed level in terms of the trends as well as the changes that both the enterprises as well as the service providers have seen. Very quick reasons. The main one was the unprecedented acceleration in terms of the digital transformation investments. A lot of cloud uptake, multi-cloud software solutions uptake. And this cloud adoption also led to the complexity and confusion in terms of where the responsibility starts and ends, and who's in charge of these managing the cybersecurity infrastructure, or as well as who's going to secure these apps and services. That confusion still continues these days. Secondly, the uptake in remote and hybrid work models that vastly expanded the boundaries of enterprises as well as increased the threat surface, leaving gaping holes and vulnerabilities. There were a lot of unpatched applications, gaps, and it sort of introduced a lot more heterogeneity into what was already a very confusing IT infrastructure. And quite honestly, some of the very hastily implemented security programs do not full well understood or have actually helped in completely securing the enterprise, because you see a lot of nodes and patches which are not clearly secured. And there were a lot of incidents in terms of how sophistication or the sophisticated attacks. There were quite a lot of those attacks in terms of the percentages that increased, and there were quite a lot of data leaks across all enterprises, irrespective of whether they are large or small. And we've also seen increases in terms of the complexity as well as the frequency of these attacks. A few things that were positive, including the growth in terms of how identity and access management has become a very centralized area of focus. It started gaining quite a good amount of stronghold in terms of the starting point for any security investment, be it large or small. And I think there is a good understanding among enterprises that that would probably be the foundational step to stop breaches and data losses. And there is a strong thought leadership among providers. A lot of R&D and investments have been are being made for across the security technology aspects, but more so the talk is predominantly on zero trust, SASE, and we've also started seeing quite a bit of sovereign cloud related architectures and other trusted security capabilities, which would help meet a lot of compliance requirements, especially from localization and other compliance needs. We saw extended managed detection and response solutions gaining a lot of growth in the market. Quite a lot of new players have come into the market, and it has been really exciting, predominantly from this perspective, because it paved the way for how advanced threat intelligence and remediation capabilities are more important. That sort of pushed the boundaries for managed services to come out of their shell of being just managing operations and other things. IoT is again providing a lot more acceleration from the convergence of IT and OT perspective. A lot of endpoint solutions are gaining traction because of that, but there are still some complexities around it. But I think Vinod will probably be able to best answer some of those. And as the cybersecurity market continued to witness traction, and as I said before, it was always an upward trend for the managed security service providers, which is probably why we are going to look at them in detail in terms of how they are going to pave the way for the future cybersecurity mesh that we are going to discuss in detail. At the current state of the managed services, I would say it has been fairly across large and small segments. It has been fairly equal, and I think we do definitely understand that there is a level of complexity or the management in terms of how and what needs to be invested in. To start off with, I would definitely say that there is a high level of complexity in terms of managing multiple security tools and solutions, with enterprises predominantly investing on ad hoc business decisions. And there was a lot of belief in terms of best of breed capabilities when it comes to securing their enterprise assets. We also noticed that this sort of confusion could quite often lead to a distinct lack in terms of how they handle cybersecurity talent. And I think the US official numbers hovers around somewhere around 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity positions. And considering that most enterprises typically fill positions that would probably suit their own enterprise objective needs, investing in cybersecurity talent often takes a backseat. And the third factor was rather more surprising, that we have seen quite a bit of legacy security technologies among enterprises, especially some where the support for those products have been discontinued, or those firms have not been even in existence for some time now, which leaves quite a lot of vulnerabilities with no patches or updates available. And keeping these systems running is actually a bit of a bigger challenge. And the downside to that is that there is no available talent with such sort of relevant expertise in some of these legacy technologies. And I think for these reasons, we see that the market responding with a significant change in terms of how they approach their buying, and a drastic shift in their mindset and the approach when they are engaging with MSSPs. And I think projects that once had cybersecurity as just as a very basic add-on, in fact, witnessed 25% increase in scope. That's what the ISG index tells us. And I think the cybersecurity related projects and then billions in annual contracts are up for grabs from the last year onwards. While we definitely see ransomware continuing to be a top threat that enterprises face, we are also seeing quite a lot of internal threats becoming more prevalent. While we see some of them are accidental, we also see quite an increase in terms of how there are intentional internal threats that are becoming more and more relevant. And so to prevent some of these aspects, I think there needs to be a good amount of literacy in terms of how cybersecurity needs to be instilled in both employees inside as well as when they are working from outside environments. And what was once cybersecurity, what was once a growing part of the application development and maintenance part, we now see there is a complete shift where more deals are very specific to cybersecurity, and the scrutiny of these providers, it starts with the MSP capabilities and how they can handle very specific security challenges. We're also seeing more of these assessments in terms of how to choose an MSP are becoming more prominent. And they have started reviewing some of these with the MSSP's capability to handle legacy technology because of the lack of talent that we just saw. and in some cases, if they do not necessarily match up, the MSSPs are just not being up for some of these deals. And we are also seeing that some of these core offerings where higher value cybersecurity services like threat hunting, identity management, cyber analytics, threat intelligence, most of these are gaining much more prominence. And while these trends are still trending in the market, we still need to plan and architect a better way of how to resolve technology challenges for a better cyber future, which is why I believe that this is the right time for understanding the capabilities of MSSPs and how much have they invested in becoming the right provider or a partner that will lead us to the business resilience era. So with that in mind, I think it makes sense for us to just take a quick look at the evolution of the managed services, what it has been. And while we definitely see that there is a lot of growth for advisory and implementation support, over the last 2 years, I think especially because of the MDR, the managed detection and response capabilities that these MSSPs have started inculcating, I think the market has seen some very unprecedented changes. The MSS service continues to grow, and the service delivery was already a very mature model. But then there was more room for how innovation and technology and the adoption of some of the newer service delivery capabilities were becoming more and more important. And while early on the MSS providers focused purely from a maintenance and operational aspect, I think simply monitoring and raising any alert depending on severity is no longer the requirement. Some of the large enterprises have certain teams that can take care of that, which means the market also needs to, the market also showed a significant shift in terms of the mindset, which forced the MSSPs to actually take on some of the capabilities that leading technology vendors would probably pursue, which means as the threat scenario changed devastatingly frequent and more complex, we see that not only the security technology vendors, but we also see the MSSPs also having to change their strategy from being reactive to more proactive and preemptive solutioning approaches. And as mentioned earlier, while most of the MSSPs are not pure play security providers, you see quite a bit of system integrators that have become managed service providers. And over the years, most of these have gained additional capabilities, which have started yielding some form of dividends in terms of strong expertise. They've started cultivating, or they've started acquiring capabilities that are more multifunctional, multi-technology. We talk about multi-domain skill sets. And they've also achieved a capability with which they can very easily industrialize their services that would help them to meet very unique vertical needs and very specific challenges that unique verticals would probably have. Let's say manufacturing will have quite a lot of different challenges when it comes to cybersecurity from an OT perspective when you compare that with telecom. So those changes are also happening simultaneously. But most of this happened between 2019 and 20, which started increasing the traction for MDR. And that set the stage for the detection and response capabilities, leading the way for how MSSPs can start investing in these solutions and become more relevant. Now, there are certain MSSPs who do not still want to invest in much of those capabilities, are there at a starting point, who have suddenly received more of a jolt, and it's just forcing their hands to start showcasing their capabilities and investment in these areas. But having spoken about the MDR capabilities, we also still need to think whether MDR is going to be the solution for a complete security system. Is it the silver bullet that we keep thinking about? While it can definitely handle some complex threats, which is both internal and external, it can even solve some problems when it comes to the known and the unknown. But we still see quite a lot of enterprises concerned about the capabilities in terms of how can it definitely solve certain challenges, especially when the size and scale are quite different. And similarly, there are also concerns concerns with enterprises that arise from a price and other areas from a service delivery capability. But we definitely see that MDR is probably the most important and an innovative piece in this part of the puzzle that started with the pandemic. And several aspects have been put together to create and conceptualize the entire paradigm of MDR, where we see quite a lot of threat intelligence that would allow for real-time detection, isolation, remediation. Sometimes it even goes to an extent of having good response capabilities that can, do away with the threat completely. And and the onset of this MDR that changed the managed aspect of how security was looked at in the past, and it changed the perspectives from more of consolidating the existing coverage rather than managing it in a very disparate way previously, given the increase in the multitude of individual and pointed solutions. And this is becoming even more solidified, where enterprises are expanding their boundaries, as mentioned in the earlier slides. And this is becoming more and more imperative because there are just not that many options where you can just sit and monitor and alert without providing any real-time protection. And MSSPs need to be becoming more and more proactive in terms of how they can identify and detect as well as respond to threats. What we see is the underlying technology is being packed more and more with a lot of heuristics, a lot of analytics-based approaches. It goes beyond the traditional libraries where threat hunting relies on contextual or content as well as behavior-based analytics. And we could also already see why cyber analytics is becoming a discipline, which is gaining more and more mileage and traction. Because on the other hand of how digital transformation initiatives are becoming more data-centric, which again leads to the analytics part of the puzzle. I think the same is happening with the cyber analytics as well, which would probably be the underlying foundation where threat intelligence will completely depend on. But while considering that, we still think that we are in the early stages of growth in MDR. We definitely see MDR becoming something else in the interim, with it becoming more and more packed with not just real-time capabilities in terms of just detection, but also more so in terms of how response and recovery would probably become much more important as the complexities develop, as the complexities become much more sophisticated. What we also see is that there is a sizable portion of technology vendors that continue to target the SMB market, which means the larger market is still left for the grabs. And honestly, some of these pure play MDR providers who have service lines, they are for some reason not able to target the larger market. They still feel that the SMB market is probably the sweet spot for them. And we see that there is a lot of host of these services that have flooded the market with a lot of them focusing on technology, but there needs to be some level of advisory that needs to be provided to the enterprises from adopting these relevant solutions, because their IT and the application environment is quite complex, and without the necessary understanding or without the necessary advisory capabilities, it's going to be really difficult for these providers or for these technology vendors to convince them to choose their solutions. There's just so many options available, and not everything will fit any and all enterprises. So the choice of what to choose and the choice in terms of what the existing environment is and how they can choose it will really depend on the MDR providers. And this is the biggest opportunity for the MSSPs, because they've already built these capabilities in terms of how they can assess and how they can offer the best of breed solutions. They have exhaustive or extensive vendor partnerships that they've invested in over the years. And I think we also see quite a lot of these MDR technology vendors that have created very specialized MSSP programs because they just couldn't go after the large enterprises. And it actually starts reflecting in their annualized revenues in terms of how the channel partners' revenue is influencing their overall revenue. And on the other side, we also see that there is a very handful of MSSPs that have started investing in proprietary MDR. And we believe that these MSSPs are going to stand to gain the most, as they are going to become much more capable in terms of their analytics, in terms of their heuristics engine, in terms of their partnership, and overall how well they'll be able to detect threats and how well can they be able to provide the necessary response and other capabilities. I'm just going to make quickly through the next few slides because it's more of a play for Vinod to actually start explaining much more from. Yeah. So let me just quickly provide the obvious reasons why we think that MSSPs are probably better suited to take the current phase as well as the next phase of MDR, as well as eventually to the cybersecurity mesh architecture that we are talking about. They're definitely better in terms of how they have structured themselves to gain more experience, as well as the MSSPs have seen far wider multi-domain and multifunctional deals over the past years, which has allowed them to create some very structured playbooks when it comes to service delivery. And that has improved their capabilities far, far superior when you think about how a technology vendor can actually offer services. And we also see that they have an army of SOC experts that are rigorously trained, and any new technology that comes up, they are immediately investing in those technologies, and they are partnering with these MDR providers, and they are quickly gaining expertise in some of these technologies. And then aside from being trained in newer methods, we also see that some of the decades-old MSSPs actually have the capability of handling some legacy technologies, which a lot of emerging providers do not possess. This factor, when it combines with the exhaustive partnership that enables them to prepare for some complex threats, we certainly believe that large MSSPs are the only ones in a position that can actually handle a very large heterogeneous IT environment, which is one of the key challenges that we have started seeing, which is creating the gaps for threat actors to actually exploit. Couple of other challenges or couple of other advantages that we see for the MSSPs is the extensive investment that they have set up for their cyber defense as well as cyber fusion centers. The reason why these become more critical is it allows the aggregation and sharing of knowledge from quite a very vast regional, as well as from very vertical specific data, as well as some very specific segment based threats that they are witnessing or that they are coming across. Now, what it does is it allows in proactive simulations. It allows them to actually run tabletop and other cybersecurity exercises with their customers and partner ecosystem. And this keeps pushing their capabilities to become much more preemptive rather than being reactive. And that puts the case for the true cyber resiliency that they can offer into more of a reality. Shrikant, if you could move to the next screen, please. And when we start talking about cyber resiliency, it has become a key theme for this year, and I most certainly that it's going to become a new, it's going to continue in the next new year as well. Cyber resiliency is gaining more prominence and mindshare because it allows institutions to get back on track, even if there was something as bad as a ransomware attack, because operational resiliency or business continuity is very, very important, especially when it's in SMB, which is why you see a lot of traction for MDR from SMB segments, and which is why MDR players have made that as their sweet spot. Now, even though we talk a lot about cyber resiliency, we still feel that there is not a very standardized approach. It still lacks quite a bit of standardization in terms of methodologies or in terms of frameworks in how you will measure cyber resiliency and how will it help organizations to get back on track, and how will it be measured, and how will the service delivery be actually managed. While there are while this is leading to a renewed interest in terms of how people want to leverage some of the standardized frameworks such as NIST or SANS, we still lack. There is a standardized approach that would also take into consideration cyber resiliency from a business continuity or from a crisis management perspective. We are yet to see that, and especially we feel that it is only part of a very natural evolution that enterprises should definitely worry about recovery, given the extensive growth or extensive adversities that they have faced with ransomware. And what we need to realize is that while it becomes a very natural fit for enterprises to choose BCDR and other things, MSSPs already possess these capabilities. They've worked on these things for quite some time, and BCDR is only a very natural complementary service that they used to offer at one point of time. And combined with crisis management, I think this is going to make sure that MSSPs would still be in a better position than MDR providers to start offering some of the MDR plus or the MDR extended versions, what we are going to see in the remaining of this year and the next year. And this pushes us to the next point, that while we continue to rely on the frameworks that are already established for recovery, we still need a much more solidified foundation that would help us to better articulate how well can security mature, and which brings us to the stage of the cyber mesh architecture. While we still have quite a lot of commercial words thrown around it, like security fabrics and other things, we still feel that it is still in the very early stages of development. The conceptualization strongly revolves around the premise of a very strong architecture that is able to combine some advanced security analytics and threat intelligence with a very centralized or consolidated approach of leveraging policy management that can be orchestrated using a single pane or a very unified dashboard, which would help high-level security analysts or expert security analysts to identify and respond to threat much faster, again at a very unprecedented scale that what we see today from an MDR perspective. And the most interesting aspect is in the CMA concept is that it enables the capability to handle multiple security tech stacks across a very expanded scope of devices or apps or network without the enterprises having to switch their existing technology. And that would probably reduce a significant amount of spend and also allow the enterprises to pace their investments as the technologies mature, which would again help reducing some existing gaps in terms of cybersecurity vulnerabilities as well as gaps. And what we saw with respect to the growth in terms of zero trust identity management and cloud security, for some reason, the mesh is hidden behind all of these conversations. It's just not still visible. And this is where we again think there are some service providers who have started taking advantage of that, and they've started moving heavily or started investing and started conceptualizing and started commercializing some of these aspects. And which brings us to the next stage, that at a very high level, CMA would probably aim to allow the integration across quite a lot of existing heterogeneous networks, where we are going to see a connectivity, a uniform connectivity that would be enabled across disparate technology solutions, especially the newer ones, the SASE or the cloud access brokers or the cloud security posture management, most of these new ones which are currently operating in very siloed modes. And this integration and hence the analysis would not only help in identifying threats, but we also see that the architecture is capable of isolating some of these things that would prevent any further spread within the enterprise network. And moreover, we believe that the architecture would also help in addressing the security gaps. And we talked about the heterogeneous systems where quite a lot of the enterprises have disparate systems, but I think more of that will come from Vinod's discussion. And then which moves me to the last or the final stages of the topic, where at this juncture, what we need to realize is that just like any other technology, while the premise of the CMA continues to resonate with SASE or zero trust, quite a lot of the understanding within the market is about that it is a very productized opportunity. But in reality, it is more of a heavily service-oriented approach with the orchestration and the integration of all these existing components requires very heavy or very specialized experience and scale of understanding the underlying architecture as well as the complexity in handling heterogeneous systems. Which again brings me back to the reason why MSSPs are much more suited to handle the CMA and take it forward. They are probably the centerpiece of the entire CMA puzzle, where they've already had the established connection with partners, they have the necessary army of experts, they have the necessary investments and the backing, and they've already started taking head on with the MDR technology as well as the services. And in cases like identity or SASE, or even with MDR, while they were all initially thought about as a very product or a solution oriented technologies, we've already seen that there is enough traction and growth from MSSPs because of their service reliability and the handle that they have on a business resiliency perspective, which is why most of these have become managed already. And when I say managed, this is not the managed detection and response, but more so from the managed service providers perspective. And without much ado, I would like to pass on the baton to Vinod to better understand how Atos is currently investing in these areas, and why is this probably the right time to discuss this area, and what thought leadership have you already started building that would ensure business and cyber resiliency for your customers.
Thank you, Gautam. Thanks for all the great insights. So I will move on into the how we view the future of MDR and what we are doing around the same. Gautam has already covered in detail on how the evolution has happened. So at a summary level, MSSP always had two components. One is the monitoring side, the other is the security product and policy management part. So the MSSP over the last 3 to 4 years, most of the transition has already happened to MDR, adding the response piece to it and better detection happening through analytics, etc. And moving forward, we see a shorter evolution into, again, like Gautam described, MDR 1, 2 kind of versions, where it's going to add more modules to address the short-term challenges that we have in terms of threats and the digital transformation that's happening. And 3 to 5 year time frame is when we really expect CSMA to evolve in the entirety, but we already have aspects of CSMA that is getting covered now. And going into the next slide to really look at what is the current offering that we have, and then we'll start looking at what is the next short-term future and the long-term one. So in the current offering that we have on MDR, it is a multi-vector detection. Again, like Gautam highlighted, there are different things to be covered when you need to detect. So attacks can happen from cloud, can happen from endpoint, can happen from data centers. Network still continues to be a key threat vector. So the offering has coverage on all these vector. In fact, we keep saying that if in cybersecurity today, if you're blind anywhere, you're blind everywhere. Essentially means that unless you cover all aspects, the attack can it lead to a breach coming in from any of these vectors which are less covered. And the response side has been the critical add-on in terms of MDR when the transition happened from MSSP. On the response, we provide a triaging of any alerts that gets detected, automated investigation along with expert investigation put on top of that, ensuring that if it is a serious attack that can lead to a breach, there is immediate containment of the attack that can happen, and also a longer term mitigation that comes into picture. And this whole thing is delivered through, again, like Gautam mentioned, the technology platform is there, Alsaac, but also leverages a lot of expertise across globally 16 SOCs that we have, and a lot of experts who are sitting across these SOCs, specialized on things like threat hunting, specialized on things like threat intel, security incident management, incident response. So it does call for a number of skill sets today to actually deliver a managed detection and response offering. Expanding into that, the detection we already said needs to cover the multi-vector aspect. So this is just a reflection of where all we need to collect from in today's environment. But the more important point is that the collection also needs to take the context into picture. For example, what is the business context of the asset? What is the vulnerability context of the asset? What's the config context of the asset? Unless we can blend the context with what is getting collected in terms of events, a more meaningful detection in terms of saying that an asset which has exposed vulnerabilities but is critical to the business with loose configuration is getting targeted by an attacker means that there has to be a higher focus or higher triage of effort to make sure that that is getting acted on first. So the context integration is also critical. The cloud aspect is very critical today because most organizations today have a footprint in one or two clouds, at least two clouds. It could be that there is office automation happening through Azure. It could be that the container side is with GCP. Could be that there is a lot of VMs running off in AWS. So there is usually a combination. So it becomes very important that there is complete visibility on multiple clouds that are part of a customer environment. We today support Azure, AWS, GCP, and also Alibaba as a cloud with full central visibility, including multi-cloud data center, and also if there are OT aspects coming into picture. So that central visibility is again a very critical part of a managed detection response offering, where we can at any point in time know what's happening, across these different environments, but at the same time apply the threat detection models as well as enable containment, etc., in the cloud as well. So if there is a cloud asset that is impacted or which is compromised, it's equally important that we can isolate that particular workload, or even sometimes isolate complete virtual networks by using access policies which can be automatically deployed using the API integration that's readily available. So multi-cloud again is a key part of the offering today, and the detection mechanism on all the things that are collected relies on, of course, rules, which is the traditional SAEM part of the technology, but also threat intelligence applied across everything that's getting collected. So this enables us to understand attacks happening from known attackers. The rules and signatures enables us to detect known threats. But today, because of the complexity of attacks, there are a lot of attacks happening which are camouflaged attacks. You don't know where the attack is happening from, or we cannot really fingerprint the threat actor. And also the attacks are, a new variation happens. Therefore, the machine learning side becomes a very important part of the overall detection, with detection that is required for unknown kind of threats. So that's really the current state. Looking at what is getting added, in the shorter term, external attack surface management is a key module that's getting added into MDR. When I say short term, it is essentially this year and a good part of next year. The EASM, as it is termed, is an important perspective for an organization to understand how does my enterprise look for an attacker from the outside. What's the exposure that is there? So that exposure understanding is very important when we are trying to detect and respond to attacks. And vulnerability scanning and integration of vulnerability has been happening for some time now, but with the increased number of vulnerabilities and all the different types of supply chain attacks we have seen, etc., one trend is to understand among all the vulnerabilities, which are the ones that are really critical, which are the ones that are already getting used in ransomware, which are the ones that are being already used in active breaches. So the prioritized vulnerability list, the triaged ones, becoming an input into the traditional MDR is also a trend that is become important. And verticalization of MDR in terms of the industry verticalization. So all the attacks happening today are not horizontal. Today, we see a very strong trend towards, for example, OT being targeted for, in terms of manufacturing utilities. We also have had traditionally financial services. For example, Swift is a great example we have. So the attacks are becoming more and more industry centric and verticalized, and therefore the protection mechanisms also should move, in that direction. The other part is the recovery side, which also is a critical part, like what Gautam was saying. We'll cover more details of how we are managing the recovery aspects in a few slides from now. But let's focus on the EASM part right now. So the EASM side gives a great perspective in terms of what is the exposure an organization has with respect to vulnerabilities that are existing on, could be simple websites, could be business applications, which are exposed on the internet. Based on social media presence, what is the exposure that is there? It could be data exposure that's happening there. It could be takeover of social media by certain threat actors. Similarly, Git repositories could have credentials stored there, could have critical parts of code availability, etc., for a DevOps environment. So there are a number of exposures, including the dark web, which an organization has. Combining that and integrating that exposure understanding with traditional MDR enables a complete 360-degree view of risk. Because with MDR, the threats, the attack that's happening is very clear. with EASM, the aspect of what exactly is the exposure is also clear. So combining that, we get to a stage where a complete 360 degree of risk view is possible, and that's very important from today's context of all the elevated attacks that are happening. Moving into the industry side of it, again, something that was reflected by Gautam, Atos has strategic partnerships with technology players. So we have Nozomi as a partnership, which is very specialized on the OT side of things. So with that, we are in a position to look at attacks happening on the OT side and combine and integrate that with the different models that we have for detection. So that essentially makes it a more correlated view and very industry specific view in terms of detecting attacks. So that's, in the interest of time, I'm not getting into other verticals and how we detect, but it's an example of how it gets verticalized for manufacturing, utilities, and many industries which are really leveraging OT and IIoT. The recovery side, is again a very critical module that's getting added. If you look at, again, the great example that we have is all the ransomware attacks happening. So based on the ransomware attacks, today it's not just enough if we can contain and eradicate the attack, but we need to really have strong plan in terms of, how do we make sure that we recover. So for that, the planning piece is very important. Do we know what are the critical assets? Do we know what data is required for recovery? What is the RTOs and RPOs we need to really work towards, and then proactively move critical data into vaults which cannot be penetrated. It's like a one-way diode kind of thing, and also have automation to recover the infrastructure. So from that perspective, when an attack happens, we can be sure that we can use the automated infrastructure recovery as well as recover the data from vault very quickly. So this is, with respect to some of the, short-term things that, we can expect. Moving into the long-term evolution, which is essentially driven by the digital transformation that's happening, as well as the threat landscape changes corresponding to that. While we today have integration, machine learning to a good extent getting used, etc., the industry requirement, is more towards standard APIs and integration methods, which every platform can follow or the industry can follow in general, which can make the speed of integration very fast. But apart from that, what's more critical is that there is also that dynamic kind of integration, that is coming into picture. When I say dynamic, when someone is logged into, say, many applications, as an example, today somebody can be logged into a CRM application or a business application, and through mobile, through desktop, through iPad, and tablets. So when the login happens, sometimes the login can stay there for some time. But in the meanwhile, if some parameter changes, for example, the device got a vulnerability which is exposing it, or the person moved from one location to another, the application needs to have the dynamism of integration to be able to communicate back that some parameters have changed and therefore the risk posture has changed. So that kind of dynamic integration is something that the CSMA architecture is shooting for. The other part where the product and policy management aspects of MSSP will take a giant leap with CSMA, when we will the work that's happening is towards bringing in a very unified framework for the policy orchestration piece, where one console can push policies across all the different CSPMs, CASP, and IAMs, and all of that. So the Open Policy Agent is a great initiative on that front, early initiative, but it's a classic example of how you can use potentially one console to push policies across various technologies. And that's more important because if you really look at it, 80% of today's cloud attacks are succeeding because of configuration weaknesses, because there are just too many configurations and too many things that we need to manage as policies. And also for speed, the real-time posture changes and management of being able to isolate a machine, change rules, all that will continue. But a major change that will also happen is in terms of the playbook automation, which is happening today through SOAR technologies, which we can look at it as generation one, because there is just too many workflows to be built. It's a lot of manual workflows that is getting built. That will get replaced through an AI-driven playbook management kind of an approach. So that's again a key thing that changes. Security intelligence even today is important, but moving forward, because of the pace at which attacks are happening, and given that today we are actively seeing AI-driven attacks as well, we can expect to see a lot of real-time, risk decisions being made going into future, for which we need to have models for real-time evaluation of users, devices, clouds, network, and then bring all of these together in a holistic real-time, view of things. So these are work in progress. Some parts of it is there, some things are, getting built. And the visualization engine, which can really bring in a unified real-time view, is definitely a work in progress, but that's also part of the CSMA architecture. And to support all of this, the identity fabric has to be dynamic, like what we discussed. If the posture changes for a user while the user is logged into an application, or something suspicious is getting detected when the user is, logged in, can there be a dynamic authentication request coming in even in the middle of a session? Something similar to what's happening in internet banking today, but I mean, think of it as getting applied across to all applications moving into future. So that's really what the mesh architecture is all about. And Gartner released a concept architecture about late last year. And there is a lot of work happening on this front now. Happy that, Atos is one of those uh, players who are aligned in this space, and the architecturally we are also positioned to deliver on this front. So while a lot of this is future, just to give a perspective of what is already there in the present, uh, we have a platform, Alsaac, which essentially is very aligned to the CSMA solution architecture. So as you can see here, it's a layered approach. So there is a connector layer which is, collecting from so many different uh, technologies and sources. So integration with other SIEMs or even XDR platforms is important from an architecture perspective, because the customer could have investments already into SIEM, into XDR. So how do you leverage the current existing investment is also a factor in the CSMA architecture. And we have, collection from OT, IoT, and vulnerability identity. So all the different vectors that we also discussed before. And all of this goes into a security data lake, because for the security intelligence layer to work, there is a need for a large data lake that can store all this information. And the analytics layer or the intelligence layer leverages different algorithms ranging from simple statistical models to unsupervised to supervised to deep learning. Today in the industry, a lot of skew is towards unsupervised and statistical, but by the time CSMA architecture emerges, there will be a lot more on the deep learning side. Once the detection happens, the orchestration piece is very important. So orchestration, like I mentioned, the long-term CSMA view will become an AI-driven orchestration, but today we still can, block attacks. We can, have the posture management to reconfigure certain identities so that if it is compromised, those identities can be blocked. So all of that forms part of the orchestration layer. And of course, all the visibility into this environment comes through the risk dashboards. Just to deep dive on some samples around it, posture management today, uh, there is a lot of rich auto remediation that's already available. So we can block a user going out through a proxy if we determine that the user is compromised. We can disable accounts in O365 if it is determined that the user accounts have been compromised. We can rewrite rules on firewalls, on cloud technologies. All of this is really, the focus is how do you contain initial compromise before it becomes a full-fledged breach, because breach is where the impact is high. A few systems getting compromised today's world, I think you really cannot, it's a known thing that that's bound to happen. So how do you contain breach? Through posture management is already there. The risk scoring is again already present. We score every single user in the environment based on suspicious activities, what kind of attempts have happened on the user, some kind of activities we have seen. All of that contributes to a rich user risk score. And all of this again comes together on a visualization where there are executive level dashboards where there are heat maps, where the heat maps can enable us to understand which assets are going into red. The heat maps can enable us to understand which business units are going into red, which compliances are moving into red, in tandem with the user risk scoring that is already present, and also the assets are also getting risk scored. And then, of course, on an operational basis, there is always the ongoing thing in terms of how many alerts did we see, how many did we resolve, what's the average time that we take for resolving certain kind of attacks, which attacks are taking longer time to resolve. So all of that operational data is also already covered for. So this was more or less a quick snapshot on where we are on CSMA. Of course, there is a lot of work that will continue to happen on that front, because it's a 3 to 5 year trend. So the work on security intelligence, the work on bringing in a common policy, management layer, the work on rich real-time visualization, which can enable CISOs to very quickly take business decisions based on how the risk posture is moving for an organization. All of that is a work in progress. And so with that, I will leave it open for any questions which are there. We are almost at the end of the session. So thank you, for your time on choosing to spend time on this session.
Okay. A big thank you to both our speakers for taking the time to share these insights on the current security landscape, so you as a buyer can make the right choice for your environment. So since we only have 5 minutes, we'll take 2 questions. We have one from Mihai for Vinod. When do you expect CSMA to be a reality?
Yeah, so CSMA, I think definitely for it to become a full-fledged reality, it's anywhere in the 3 to 5 year time frame. But there are a set of players already in the market, including Atos, who have the alignment towards it. The architectural frameworks are already in place, so it will be definitely easier to add on different modules as we go. The current MDR offering is right fit for today's challenges, and the short term, like what we saw, adding an EASM to a recovery option, to better integration of prioritized vulnerabilities, all of that will lead to a robustness towards the short-term challenges. But the future is about AI-driven attacks, more real-time responses that are required, having a much better visibility and visualization, and having a policy enforcement that is very robust. All of that, I think, are things which will come to maturity in maybe in the next 5 years, 3 to 5 years.
Thanks, Vinod. And the next one is for Gautam from Josephine. And Gautam, I think this is based on what you were talking about earlier in your session. She asks, are you trying to say pure play MDR players will lose ground?
No, absolutely not. I don't think that is what I intended to say. The idea is that the MDR pure play players probably do not have the scale or the experience and the team size to actually cope with some of the challenges that the large enterprises typically have, and more so to contribute more effectively for the cybersecurity mesh architecture. I think that's what is more the direction, or that's the more angle that I want to say. MDR is definitely suited for the small and medium-sized enterprises. That's what their sweet spot is. Quite a lot of the MDR providers do understand that, but it is a very important piece, and it is a very innovative piece in the puzzle at this stage, moving away from just detecting it to responding and recovering. So it's quite important. But no, they're also still important part of the puzzle.
Thanks a lot, Gautam. Okay, so that brings us to the end. Thank you everyone for joining us today. If we did not answer any of your questions here, we will respond to you on email. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us for a demo of the capabilities we discussed here today or any other questions you have. And remember, you can download this presentations from the attachments tab below the video screen. So that's all for now, folks. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, Srikanth. Thank you, Vinod. Thank you, Anna. Good evening.
Thanks, everyone.